Meeting of the Transportation Technical Advisory Committee to order. Lindsay, could you do roll call?
Yes. Mike Haynes.
I'm here.
Corey Aldridge.
Here.
Sarah Cofield.
Here.
Dory Brownlow.
Here.
John Wilson.
Here.
Lisa Moisey.
Here.
Ben Weiss. Brent O'Connor.
Eric Dixon, proxy for Brent O'Connor.
Carol Struzich.
Vicky Cernich, proxy for Carol.
Shane Stack.
Here.
Donna Gockler.
Here.
Lynn Hellegard.
Here.
Patrick O'Haron.
Lisa Moisey, proxy for Pat O'Haron.
And Alan Buchanan.
Okay, thank you. Do we have Helena on the phone? No? All right, let's move on to approval of minutes then. We have minutes from the last meeting. Is there any comments or questions from committee members? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve? Motion by Lynn. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Corey. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that is unanimous. Is there any public comment for items not on today's agenda? We have a small public. All right, seeing none, then we'll move on to our first item, which is a new business item, Amendment 6 to the TIP. Aaron.
Yeah, thanks. So this is another amendment to the fiscal year 2016 to 2020 Transportation Improvement Program. We received requests from the MDT to amend the Russell Street project on for the first phase. There are two pieces to that. One is for the PE phase in 2016. There's an additional $95,000 added to PE. And then the second piece is revisions to the IC phases for both Russell from Broadway to Idaho and from Idaho to Dakota. So those two phases have kind of been condensed into one project. So that amount, the additional $711,000, comes from two different IC pieces on those tables. So if you look under the fiscal year 2016, IC for both Broadway to Idaho and Idaho to Dakota, and that is to cover additional utility relocation expenses. Above and
Corey
beyond.
has a question.
Yeah, Corey.
Can you remind us what PE and IC stand for?
Yeah, it's preliminary engineering, and IC is indirect costs, right? Is that right? Shane? Yeah, utilities. So.
I thought IC meant incidental construction or
Yeah.
It is utilities. It refers to utilities, incidental construction.
Right.
When you
So
see
all
IC, essentially it's utility relocation.
right.
So.
Okay, that was a good question.
Yeah, right.
I was like, what does this mean?
We live with acronyms, right? We don't ever know what they mean. And so this, to do the cost amounts and the frequent changes to Russell, we did the typical public notice. So we provided 30 days. Advertisement is advertised in the Missoulian and posted on the city's website. So staff's recommendation is that we approve these modifications as proposed. And that's, I think, all I have, unless MDT staff has anything to add about the additional utility relocation costs or PE.
If there are questions, I certainly would answer.
I have a question. Yeah, can you explain $700,000 difference?
Sure.
What that is? Okay.
Early on, I think what we did was just did a rough estimate and said, let's put, I think it was $500,000 in each project, essentially, for utility relocates. I think they probably looked at it and said, given this is an urban project, this is probably a reasonable amount to expect. Just came in more. There might have been more utilities to actually relocate. We're also going underground, which adds significant cost. So in an urban area, you can still have overhead power, and the cost to do that relocation is a lot less. When you start going underground, those costs go up. So I would imagine they probably didn't put a lot of thought into what the cost would be, not knowing all the details. And so that's why we're where we're at. I think we know the cost now. The utility companies are telling us this is what it's going to cost for us to do that work, and this is what your share will be. So, and then on the PE side, we've had the 90,000. We still what our project manager did was say, let's make sure we have a buffer to finish out the engineering component for the rest of the project. I think she ended up with about a $50,000 amount in there to make sure that we had that amount to finish. Right now, we are working with a lot of property owners and changing plans just to detail the specific issues of every property. So we're meeting with landowners constantly to try to negotiate the property acquisition. So hopefully you won't see any more amendments on the PE side. My guess is once we are under construction, we might see more. We'll see.
Yes, Sarah.
I'm just wanting to clarify where precisely the additional funds is coming from. Are we borrowing against, STPU from later in the STPU funding, sort of pushing other STPU projects back further with this?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, so if you notice on the tables, the expenditures or the amount for the decoded amount phase in 2019 has gone down to accommodate so then that phase is essentially being funded from future year funds.
So we get about $1.8, I think, million per year from STPU funds. And so, yes, every amendment that increases cost, that comes from STPU. So this is essentially half a year's worth of STPU for this amendment. So yeah, it is important to recognize the impact, the long-term impact.
Corey?
Do you know what the total amount of STPU overages there have been for the Russell Street project?
I do not. And I guess we'd have to figure out what the definition of overages is. I guess just
based on the initial cost.
Based on the initial
put
estimate,
into
what we've had to change. That's
Yeah.
something that we could try to come up with and calculate and bring back to you guys next month.
Any other questions or comments from committee members? Is there any public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none. Is there a motion?
I'd move to approve the amendment as recommended.
Thanks. Motion made by Shane. Is there a second? Second by Lynn. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that's unanimous. Okay, moving on to items of old business, the long-range transportation plan update.
So there's a couple items that we have that we want to talk about. The first one is giving you kind of a preview of preliminary project rankings. This is still a work in progress, and we met with our long-range plan technical advisory committee, which is a subset more or less of this group, to review where we were at with project scoring. We had that meeting on Tuesday. And in your packets, we've printed out a lot of colorful bar graphs and such. And and that's what these look like right here, but we've printed out for you the top 20 as it stands right now and we're still doing some scoring. Part of our scoring is reliant on output from the model runs, which we're still in the process of doing. But what we're looking for from you guys today is to kind of take a look at this. Let us know if you see any red flags in terms of projects that might be up higher priority in the list, or if you think that there might be something missing. And then we also have the complete list in your packet as well of all of the projects. And I think what we've given you is just the roadway category and the non-motorized category of projects, so not even the complete list. But we wanted to show this to you guys, get any feedback that you might have. The Technical Advisory Committee had a few comments for us at our meeting on Tuesday, one of which was to ensure that ITS, which is kind of in its own category, doesn't get lost in the shuffle of being a project that is, well, not only in the list, but perhaps prioritized. And so that's something that we wanted to note, that ITS is still in there, and from all of the public feedback we've gotten, as well as feedback we've gotten from you guys and the TBCC, that continues to be a priority. We also got some comments from County Parks and Trails about looking at some of the trail projects and ensuring that we do indeed have them on the list. And so we're still fine-tuning stuff, and we will be presenting all of our final project rankings at our next public meeting, which is now going to be scheduled for October 20th. So I want to make that announcement right now. We originally had it scheduled for the 18th, but it's going to be October 20th in this room. It's going to be an open house style, and it will be from about 5 p.m. to 7:30 p.m.
And just to point out a couple of things about these charts of projects, we've tried to make it really clear where projects are scoring in terms of the goals and criteria. So it's all color-coded, so you can compare projects and how they're scoring, with criteria in Goal 1 versus Goal 2, or projects that score the highest. You can see where they're getting those points, and then if you have concerns about that or questions about why they're scoring so high, you can go into the map tool that we created. You can look through the data and some of our comments. We've tried to put comments on our staff scoring portion. So all of this is a publicly accessible Google Doc. They're contained in the mapping app, but if you want to look at them separately, I can send you those links, or we can start getting those out there. But as you can see, we tried to put in as many comments as we could to make it clear why we were giving projects the score that we did. Again, to be transparent and make sure that if there are disagreements about how that could be scored, we can address it or change those comments. You can also go in and create your own tab, copy one of these and add in comments. We have one set up already for our Technical Advisory Committee scoring and comments. You could go in there and type in some comment on a project if you disagree with the scoring or think that we've missed some critical piece of data, or if the data that we're using is out of date, not good, and there's some context that we should be adding. So there's a lot of projects there and a lot to go through, but now that we can start having them ranked, I think it's easier to go through and see what projects are rising to the top, which ones aren't, and then you can go in, find things that seem surprising or that you might not agree with, and provide us comments. So that's kind of where we're at with the project scoring.
Does anybody have any questions? I think generally the projects that seem to be rising to the top are are basically the same as the ones that we've had in the long-range plan that were highly prioritized previously. So from our perspective, we don't see anything surprising, but we want to make sure that we're not just looking at it through our staff lens and we give people the opportunity to balance this out.
Corey.
I will say after meeting on Tuesday that this process that they're going through is they're trying to be very unbiased about it and actually come up with a really thoughtful way of looking at each project. So it's a pretty it's impressive. So thank you, staff.
Thank you.
So is this a request for TTAC members to provide comment on these rankings?
Yeah, it's more of a check-in. We want to check in and see from you guys if there's any red flags or issues right now. This is still preliminary, and we will be continuing to score. And even, these ones that we've completed so far are not fully complete because we're still doing some model runs, and there's outputs from those related to delay and congestion and VMT increases or decreases that will further add to these scores. But we don't think that any of those will necessarily make huge changes, and we don't think that they'll really move things around a whole lot in terms of the ranking right now.
Yeah, Vicky?
So for the Riverfront Triangle and the North Bank Riverfront Trail, the way that Goal 7 is presented, does that mean it has a negative impact?
Yeah, so for that goal, which is related to natural resources and environmental preservation, we have a criteria in there, and I didn't bring my criteria sheet, but it's related to if a project could impact a sensitive area or an area of environmental concern, so like floodplain or
riparian areas, natural areas, wildlife habitat.
So we actually had a negative. So if a project fell in one of those sensitive areas, then it received, I think, -5 points or something, just as a way to recognize that not every project has a neutral or a positive impact, that there could be negative impacts as well. And I think that's the only criteria where we have a negative number is in Goal 7.
Yeah, and it sort of came down to natural resources and how do you differentiate projects that have no impact, positive impact, or, in some cases are impacting natural areas. And so it was one area where we thought it maybe warranted a negative, as opposed to you can only get positive points. And it's a pretty small amount in the grand scheme of things. I mean, you can kind of see that it might shift a project up one or down, but not really. So if that project is on the margin, that might be the deciding factor, but I don't think that is going to ever drop a project considerably. So just something, and it might be something to point out that those projects may need to improve design so that they don't impact natural resources.
Yes, Donna.
I wanted to share Corey's sentiment. I think the worksheet and all the tabs, it's phenomenal and probably about as objective as we could potentially get. I was wondering for just sort of to illustrate, question I would have is on Bitterroot Trail Branch, Pine to Spruce versus Bitterroot North to Livingston. And I don't have all the goals right in front of me, but would you mind just kind of running through, because I would have anticipated an exact opposite result just because of potential mode shift benefit?
Yeah, and I didn't score those projects, so I'd have to go back and look at those as well. They might be ones to, particularly for you to look at and see how we scored them, and it may just be the Pine to Spruce segment by virtue of where it's located and some of the ways that you can get points, particularly the health and equity being located in an area, that we know West Side, Franklin to the Fort kinds of areas have, maybe higher levels of persistent poverty and health, based on the work that the health department is doing with Let's Move Missoula and some of the research they're doing, which I guess I would expect that to be similar for the North to Livingston section too, but without having scored those, I don't know that I could say why, but it was notable for me as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, I think we can move on to the next transit item.
Okay, so at our last TTAC meeting, we presented a lot of information to you, including modes share goal options, as well as funding allocation options that were more or less tied to the mode share goal options. And TTAC approved those. So we had three mode share options as well as 3 funding allocation options. We took that to TPCC on the 20th of September and presented all the same information. And TPCC as well approved those options. However, we did receive some comment from 2 of the TPCC members saying that they were interested in looking at an additional option that would have more of a transit emphasis. So if you recall, in your packet, we provided you another colorful set of bar charts. The 3 on the left-hand side is what we presented and approved last time, and we're just looking at the discretionary funds. So not looking at funding that is already committed to projects or transit operations or maintenance for roadways, just looking at that 97 million or so that we foresee being discretionary. And so the 4th bar, the one on the far right, is a new option that we are proposing to add into the mix that has more of a transit emphasis. And you can see that at the top of the bar, we've allocated about 15.5% to transit, and that's just for transit capital. It's not related to operations funding that Mountain Line receives from FTA. And so we've increased that percentage in that scenario 4, and in doing so, we've taken out some, or we've lessened some of the other categories. So we're just looking for any feedback related to adding another option into the mix, and if there's any questions or comments. We don't have a motion per se to include this, but barring any opposition, I think this is something that we would want to take forward and also study as well.
So what's the formula for reducing the other mode types?
Can you answer that?
Yep. Part of that was looking at, for instance, what available funding sources we have, so local versus federal, and the federal is SDPU and CMAQ, and then those other categories, so for example, transportation options, and this is something we maybe didn't consider enough when we were setting these other scenarios, but there may be limited funding eligible to go towards something like transportation options, which is funding things like the education outreach, the bike ped program stuff. Mr. TMA ends up on some of those funds. So we took a chunk of that transfer to transit from transportation options, knowing that we may not be able to fund those at the level that we're including in these scenarios. So that was kind of the bulk of it. And then some came out of safety, knowing that a lot of that safety could be accommodated in projects that are non-motorized or roadway. Corey?
Yes, Corin.
So am I correct, my understanding that this is additional funding above what is currently being received by transportation options or safety? So it's not as if you're cutting what they're currently receiving?
Yeah, so the current, so most of CMAQ is currently committed, and that's committed to programs that are already being funded through our CMAQ. And we have that in the TIP currently, so we projected those out into the future, considered that committed, and then what was left is sort of that $3 million-ish of discretionary CMAQ funding. And so that's what you're seeing as part of this overall $97 million.
And in putting this fourth scenario together, it did give us kind of a light bulb moment of, okay, well, maybe in scenarios 1, 2, and 3, we might want to bump the transportation options down to be equivalent to what it is in scenario 4, because unless something major changed, CMAQ is the program that funds transportation options, and it's not going to grow substantially. If we assume that the same programs and projects that are being paid for with CMAQ now continues in the future, then we would just kind of keep that transportation options amount equivalent across all of the scenarios. So what we're thinking is we'll take scenario 1, 2, and 3 and bring all of that down for transportation options. And in doing so, we could add that difference into transit if that's something that is desired.
Or we could split the difference amongst the rest of the modes based on their percentage, do just sort of a percent-wise allocation.
I mean, and ITS is another category in there, and that's one that we kept that same cost across all of the scenarios because it costs what it costs. So we're thinking we should have done that too for transportation options.
And there was a recommendation or discussion during the technical advisory committee that we just combine all of those into kind of an other category and leave it as a set amount through each of the scenarios, or maybe it can fluctuate, but where it goes within that other would be somewhat dependent on the kinds of projects and the money that's available.
Okay, Corey.
And so this would be, at least on the transit piece, this would be funds that wouldn't be available till after 2030, the way we're looking at Russell Street right now.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, the bulk of it.
This is 14 years out. So.
Yeah.
Any questions or comments, Donna?
Really confuse everyone.
Well, no, just on feedback, I guess one question that might be rhetorical is, if we assume that ITS and transportation option numbers won't change or are so highly unlikely to change, it makes sense to me we keep them constant unless we can think of some reason not to. And then I guess what I would encourage next is to split it among the others in the first three. If what we're trying to do with the fourth option, if I understand, is really measure that transit piece so that it still looks different than just the sort of, based on information, but somewhat arbitrary the way we just increased the three options.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions or comments? So are you looking for just an acknowledgement that the scenario 4 should be considered?
Yes.
Any objections to that from the committee? Is there any public comment on this item? All right. Thank you. Looks like people are nodding their heads, so you have acknowledgement.
Great, thanks. And we'll also discuss this with TPCC since that's where we got the feedback from. And then, again, just as a reminder, we'll have our public meeting on October 20th in this room, open house style, from 5 to 7:30 p.m.
Okay, thanks. That's the last item on the agenda. Do you have any closing comments from staff?
No,
Nothing to share?
I don't think so. Anyone else, though?
Anything from committee members for the good of the order? All right, this was a very quick meeting. We'll be adjourned.